Man, I need to tell you something that happened to me and some friends once, and to this day we can't explain it. You know those nights when you're with your crew, with nothing to do, and someone comes up with a silly idea just to pass the time? Yeah. We decided to prank call people in the middle of the night. Me, Lucas, and Pedro thought it'd be hilarious. But bro, what happened was too bizarre. It was around 2 in the morning, and we were at Pedro's house. You know that late night vibe? Everyone tired but still with enough energy to mess around? We had spent the whole day playing video games and talking nonsense when someone said, "Let's prank call people." At first, no one took it seriously, but Lucas was already making a list of random numbers. The first calls were just pure fun. We called this guy, and Lucas started telling him he had won a prize and needed to call another number to claim it. The guy hung up on us. We laughed so hard I almost cried. Then we called this woman who got super mad, thinking it was a debt collector. Pedro almost fell on the floor laughing. And then things got weird. Pedro dialed another random number and called. The phone rang, and when someone answered, silence. Complete silence. We were a bit thrown off, waiting for someone to say something, but nothing. Then suddenly, a low, raspy voice asked, "Do you want to play with me?" Man, at that moment, we all felt a chill down our spines. We went silent. Pedro, always the bravest, decided to go along and answered, "Yes, we want to play." And then the voice said, "I'm coming." That's when the mood shifted. No one laughed anymore. You know when the air in the room gets heavy and you can just feel that something's really wrong? We sat there in silence, and then the call dropped. It was too weird. We laughed, but it was that nervous laugh, the kind you do when you're not sure what's really going on. After that, Pedro got weird. He, the one who always made jokes about everything, started looking at the window, kind of paranoid. Lucas and I tried to keep it light, saying it was just some random prank, probably someone messing with us too. But deep down, we all had that strange feeling. Then, the noises started. At first, it was just the wind, nothing big. But soon it got louder, like someone walking around the house. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept getting clearer. And then the phone rang again. Man, we all froze. Lucas, who was closest, picked it up and put it on speaker. The same voice from before, only this time it said, "I'm almost there." Bro, when I heard that, my heart nearly stopped. The voice sounded closer. Pedro jumped up and ran to lock the door. I let out a laugh, but it was one of those nervous laughs, you know? Because deep down, we knew this wasn't a joke anymore. Suddenly, the house lights flickered, and right after, everything went dark. We were left in total darkness, only the dim light from the phone. And then, we heard footsteps outside. I swear, it felt like someone was circling the house. Lucas tried to calm us down, saying it was probably just a power issue. But man, I knew it wasn't just that. And then came the knocks on the door. The knocks were strong, and each time they hit, the door shook. I saw Pedro turn pale, and I wasn't much better off. We slowly approached the door, trying to hear who or what was outside. More knocks, this time louder, more desperate, like someone was trying to get in no matter what. And then the phone rang again. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking, and answered. The voice was laughing softly. "You shouldn't have played." Lucas, already pissed, threw the door open, ready to end the prank. But when he opened it, no one was there, just cold wind blowing into the house. At that moment, everything clicked. I remembered a story we had heard once. They said that if you called certain numbers in the dead of night, you could attract something. Something that wasn't human. An entity that loved to play with those foolish enough to summon it. And it seemed like, without realizing it, that's exactly what we had done. After that night, we never talked about what happened. The prank got way out of hand, and we all knew it. Pedro still swears he hears knocks at his door in the middle of the night. Lucas? He never prank calls anyone anymore. And me? Well, every time the phone rings late at night, I think twice before answering. Let me tell you about something that happened to me once, and to this day, I can't fully explain it. Just thinking about it gives me chills, but here we go. It was a normal night. I was home alone, just relaxing on the couch after a long day. You know that feeling of almost falling asleep? Yeah, I was right at that point. The house was completely silent. everything dark, and the only sound was the wind outside. The clock was already showing about 3 in the morning, and I was ready to drift off completely. Then, out of nowhere, the phone rings. Man, it scared the hell out of me. But then I thought, who the hell calls someone at this hour? I stared at the phone for a few seconds, deciding whether to answer or let it go. But, being curious, of course I answered. And when I picked up, guess what? Silence. On the other end of the line, there was no one speaking. Just that eerie silence, you know? I sat there with the phone to my ear, waiting for someone to say something, and then, out of nowhere, a voice comes on. It was low, kind of raspy, and what made my hair stand on end was that the person on the other end said my name. Julio. Now think about it. I didn't recognize the voice, but the person knew exactly who I was. My heart started racing. I tried to stay calm, but man, it's not normal to hear a voice like that calling your name, especially at 3 in the morning. And before I could react, the person spoke again. You're alone, aren't you? I looked around, just to make sure I really was alone. I couldn't even respond, just stood there, trying to process what was happening. Then the silence came back, a heavy silence that seemed to last forever. I hung up the phone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Now, what would you do in that situation? Desperate, I decided to check the house. I went around checking all the doors and windows to make sure everything was locked. And guess what? Everything was fine. But even so, I couldn't shake that weird feeling. I went back to the couch, trying to convince myself it was just a prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. And then, as if fate wanted to prove me wrong, the phone rang again. This time, the ring felt more urgent. Man, I knew I shouldn't answer, but you know how it is, right? I ended up picking up again. When I put the phone to my ear, the same voice spoke. But now, it was different. Closer, clearer. The voice said, I know you can hear me, Julio. At that moment, a chill ran down my spine. It was surreal. And before I could hang up, the person on the other end dropped a bomb. I'm here, inside the house. That's when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. Something falling to the floor. A soft sound, but enough to freeze me in fear. I hung up the phone and ran to the living room, but I didn't see anything strange. But the noise didn't stop, so I knew I had to go to the kitchen. When I got there, the kitchen door, which I was sure was locked, was slightly open. I approached slowly, heart pounding, and when I opened the door, what I saw knocked the wind out of me. The house phone, which should have been on the hook, was lying on the floor as if someone had ripped it off. At that moment, I knew this wasn't a joke. I picked up the phone from the floor, but before I could think about what to do, I heard another noise. This time, from the hallway. It sounded like something being dragged along the floor, and man, that's when the real fear hit. With my heart in my throat, I started walking down the hallway. The sound grew louder, and each step I took brought me closer to something I didn't want to face. When I reached the end of the hallway, I saw in the mirror's reflection something that made my blood run cold. A shadowy figure stood behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. I looked back at the mirror, and the figure was still there, staring at me. It didn't make sense, man. That's when the phone rang for the last time. I picked up the phone again, and this time, the voice was clearer. You're not alone, Julio. You never were. At that moment, the lights flickered, the air grew heavy, and everything around me started spinning. I understood then that I was not alone in that house. I never was. I hung up the phone, and the sound of knocking on the door echoed through the house as if someone was desperate to either get in or out, but I knew I wasn't answering it this time. After that night, I found another place to rent and moved out. Honestly, I still don't know if it was a hallucination or some spirit tied to that house. You won't believe what happened to me and Carol one time. We were camping in a dense forest, just the two of us, and what was supposed to be a peaceful night turned into a complete nightmare. Even now, just thinking about it gives me chills. It was a Friday, and we had decided to escape the routine, spend the night in nature. It had that adventurous vibe, you know? The tent was already set up, the fire was lit, and we were just relaxing. It must have been around 2 in the morning, the fire was starting to die down, when suddenly we heard a noise in the woods. And seriously, who hears footsteps in the middle of nowhere at that time and thinks it's normal? Carol went to check it out laughing, thinking it might be some small animal. But in the middle of the trees, total silence. She stood there listening, calling out to whatever it was, but nothing. She came back to the fire and we tried to ignore it, but that strange feeling started to linger in the air. A few minutes later, we heard it again, but this time, the footsteps seemed closer. Now, we weren't finding it funny anymore. Who would be walking in the forest at that hour without making a sound? Carol, always brave, turned on her flashlight and went to check again, and what she saw was terrifying. A silhouette standing in the middle of the woods, looking right at us. I almost fell over from the shock. She ran back, completely pale. We both stood there, frozen. Fear started creeping in, and Carol, trying to downplay it, said maybe it was someone lost, but I wasn't so sure. That presence felt wrong. We locked the tent from the inside, though I don't know what good that would do. But then, guess what? The noise came back, this time way too close. I was terrified, my heart racing. Carol tried to stay calm, but the silhouette seemed to be getting closer and closer. Suddenly the wind picked up, blowing out the fire completely. We were in total darkness, with only the faint light from the flashlight. And then, the sound of branches breaking came again, now right next to the tent. She looked at me, and we both knew this wasn't an animal. Someone or something was out there, and it didn't seem like it had good intentions. The flashlight started flickering, and the silence that followed was scarier than any noise. The tapping on the tent started, first softly, then harder. We were completely paralyzed, listening to the sound getting closer. Carol, out of nowhere, gathered the courage and yelled, "Who's there?" But we got no response, just silence. She tried to peek through a small opening in the tent, and what she saw outside made her face go paler than I'd ever seen. She started trembling and whispering, "This can't be real. This can't be happening." And then the sound of breaking branches came again, even closer. I knew we had to act fast. I grabbed a knife, ready for anything. The sound stopped, but the feeling that something was very wrong didn't go away. Suddenly, we heard a weak voice, almost a whisper, coming from the woods. "I'm closer than you think." I threw the flashlight aside, and we ran as fast as we could. The sound of breaking branches seemed to follow us. We stopped at a nearby farmer's house and spent the night locked in there until morning. After that scare, we never camped in the middle of nowhere again, and to this day, when I hear strange noises in the forest, I get chills down my spine.